Hello, and welcome to Coins, Cyber, and Compliance, Careers at the Cutting Edge, a fireside chat featuring Professor Kathleen DeRose and Stern alum Aditya Krishnan. My name is Martha Patton, and I'm a career coach in the NYU Stern Career Office. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Career Office and Stern's Fubon Center for Technology, Business, and Innovation. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our speakers before inviting Professor DeRose to begin the conversation. Professor Kathleen DeRose is a clinical associate professor of finance, the academic director of the Masters in Fintech program, and the director of Fubon Center's Fintech initiative. She also designs and teaches Fintech courses and programs. She brings to Stern a background in finance of 25 plus years on Wall Street, and she currently serves on the boards of tech-first finance and fintech companies, Experian, London Stock Exchange Group, Voya Financial, Apron Payments, and Taxwell. Professor DeRose received her BA from Princeton, her MBA from Triumph, and a Master of Science from Oxford. Aditya Krishnan led security risk within the governance, risk, and compliance organization at Coinbase. He assisted in building Coinbase's security risk program from the ground up. He helped product teams ship fast and safely by making risks and trade-offs clear, turning technical issues into practical guardrails and decision-ready options. With 14 years in engineering and cybersecurity, he focuses on what works, reducing avoidable risk, measuring what matters, and responding quickly when it doesn't. Aditya has an MBA from NYU Stern, an MS from Carnegie Mellon, and a BS in computer science from Jawaharlal Nehru Technological University. I'll turn it over now to Professor DeRose for what I know will be a very interesting discussion with Aditya.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Martha. Welcome, Aditya. I'm so excited to see so many of you from our community at the Fireside Chat today. We're incredibly proud of our fintech programming, research, and education, and that includes critical fintech courses for undergrads, MBAs, master students, and execs to prepare them for fintech careers. Thank you also to the Career Center and to the Fubon Center who made this and other events like this possible. Welcome, Aditya. We're so lucky to have you. It's amazing. And I thought it would be just really fun for our audience to start talking about kind of your career origins. So we want to know how you got started in cyber and in technology. Were you at home securing that perimeter as a 3-year-old from all those cyber criminals, or how did it all start?
So first of all, thank you, Martha, for that introduction. Thanks, Kathleen, for having me. And thanks to everybody dialing in. So I feel like if I think about my early days, I was very good at breaking things down, but not very good at putting things together. And one of the earliest core memories I have was my mom and dad left me home alone. I somehow stumbled upon my dad's toolkit and I ended up disassembling the television, but I couldn't quite figure out how to put it back. But I only give you that story because I feel like from my school days, to put it mildly, I've kind of always been wired towards detective work. Like I always try to figure out what's going on inside a system, like what are the things that connect it, what makes it behave predictably. So to that end, I didn't start in cybersecurity. I was actually an engineer by education. I started in engineering and data systems. But I think eventually I realized that I found that to be a little monotonous and boring. No offense meant at all. I think engineering is an incredible field. But I think what drew me was pattern recognition, finding failure modes and points, and kind of figuring out like what does it take to prevent them from happening. So I would say that would be the earliest spark, which kind of pivoted me to cybersecurity. And I think my first career step was in consulting, which kind of taught me the business grammar of technology, right? Like how does risk, how do cost and controls intersect? So I think consulting exposed me to a broad cross-section of industries from healthcare to banking that kind of gave me the muscle memory for problem solving, which is a core component of cybersecurity, regardless of what capacity you operate in. And then came the pivot to like more in-house. How do you do cybersecurity from within a company, which is like my last two career pivots, which has brought me to Coinbase now, where I think our big value add to the business is how can we help business operate smoothly while making sure they do it securely, not necessarily preventing them, but facilitating it in a in a risk-free as much as possible manner. So I'll pause there.
No, this is a great flyover of the career. And there were a couple like really important kind of forks in the road. So before we move on to more detail about cyber, maybe just pause on a couple of those and share with our audience who are thinking about careers. What do those forks look like and how did you pivot or make those choices?
So a few different things. Obviously, I think I had some professors in college who were very knowledgeable about cybersecurity. And the interesting thing was they were not teaching cybersecurity or had anything to do. The classes didn't have anything to do with cybersecurity. But one thing that I was able to take away from some of these classes was like cybersecurity essentially is an underpinning for any business to operate successfully, especially in today's day and age where everything is digitized. Everybody has data centers in the cloud. So I think as that became more and more apparent, I think that combined with my desire to always kind of peek under the hood, try to figure out what's happening, try to be that detective, try to figure out what are the dots I can connect. In some cases, my incentive was to get in just to break in for the sake of it. I think those are some of the kind of like the initial incentives to kind of got me thinking about cybersecurity. As I mentioned,
right there.
Exactly. I think those are some of the key, signals that I was able to pick up on. And then I think once I got into consulting, I realized very quickly, no matter how many types of problems that you as a consultant would end up solving for your clients, cybersecurity in some way, shape, or form would always be there. I think at that point, the big takeaway was cybersecurity, when done well, is very much embedded with the business. It's no longer a separate afterthought. It is something that is happening business as usual. So I think that kind of gave me the confidence that if I get into cybersecurity, I'm not getting away from business or getting away from some of the core things that we learn in MBA school. It's very much a part of it.
Yeah, no, this is a great point because it kind of brings us to our next one, which is how big cyber risk and cybersecurity has become. So a few stats for our audience, and this is courtesy of CrowdStrike's most recent report. So cybersecurity is big business now, and a couple details. Mean time to breakout once somebody's inside your system, average is 48 minutes. Fastest is 51 seconds. Voice phishing up 442%. Adversarial activities from folks in some adversarial countries up 150%. US has pulled back on some defenses. Industry-focused attacks up 200 to 300%. Financial services ever more in focus due to money, data, disruption potential. And Gen AI making things even more tricky and sophisticated. So background, bottom line, this is just a huge deal. And as you said, like totally connected with everyday business now. So I'm wondering, as you went along this career, you developed some pretty deep expertise in this fast growing field. Do you have some guiding principles for cyber to share with us as a group? Because I think that'd be really interesting. How do you make sense of everything that's happening and help your enterprise respond?
That's a great question. I want to add one other statistic to the numbers that you added, just to give folks a sense of scale, right? So globally, the spend on cybersecurity, broadly speaking, is in the hundreds of billions. I think the last I read, Gartner had a publication that was somewhere between 200 and 225 billion with a B. Big number, not inconsequential number by any means. However, the cost of cybercrime, criminals committing crimes that actually end up with some kind of damage, the global cost of cybercrime is estimated to be in the tens of trillions. So I think the lowest number I saw was 10.5 trillion. So the reason, why does this matter? I think I wanted to kind of give folks a sense of the amount of money people are investing in cybersecurity is in the billions, which is a large number to begin with, but the damage caused by the malicious actors out there is still a magnitude higher. So the reason I say that is, I think to give everybody a context, I think that is a core driver of some of the principles that I operate with and some of the practitioners that I surround myself with is cybersecurity is no longer an afterthought. It's not an IT problem. It is a business problem. I think in the United States, we're fortunate enough to have leaders who consider it a national security problem. So everything is digitized today. Our digital infrastructure is very much a target for foreign adversaries. So I think The guiding principle here, the key component is if you're running a business, if you're in charge of any part of the business, cybersecurity is also your responsibility. It's no longer someone else's. It cannot be outsourced to a separate team. I think making sure if you don't know anything about cybersecurity, or if you don't understand how cybersecurity can impact your business operations, I think taking the time to just educate yourself on that will do you wonders. It'll make your manner in which you do your business operations better, more secure, which in turn will be better for the company as a whole, which in turn also gives you the skill set to kind of make yourself future proof. I think making sure you're able to embed the security mindset. I'm not asking anybody to become a security engineer or become a hardcore hacker or anything, but just like learn to think through how you can protect what is important to you, what is important to the business, I think has been a guiding principle for me. I think that's how I was as a consultant. And I try very much today to make sure that we can keep thinking about it as a mindset so that enables us to continuously adapt to the ever-changing landscape.
So who are those main cyber adversaries? Because there's a disproportionate thing there in your numbers, right? In terms of what we spend to defend ourselves and then the cost of that crime. So that tells you something. So yeah. Who are the main adversaries?
So the easy answer is everybody. But the more nuanced answer is, I think adversaries are, in my opinion, a direct correlation to incentives. So in general, if adversaries can be financial criminals, like these are when you hear about ransomware attacks, these are generally perpetrated by financial criminals, people who want to hold your systems ransom until you make them a payment. I would say the biggest category of adversaries today are nation state actors. I think they are very well resourced. I think to my earlier point, cybersecurity infrastructure in any country now is a utility. If our internet goes down, many of our businesses will grind to a halt. Recently, Amazon Web Services went down, and many startups couldn't function. They couldn't fulfill their customers' needs. And then I would say the third category, and this is, Gen AI is certainly helping this, is insiders. These are people who may or may not have malicious intent, but they now have access to tools that if they don't know how to use correctly, can have outsized impact. So, think insiders who either know what they're doing or don't know what they're doing, who can still damage a business. Intent or not, damaging a business is damaging a business. You end up losing money. So I would say those are broadly the three categories. And then you obviously have, very determined individuals who I would say don't have a ton of resources. So we tend to not prioritize them. But I would say those are the type of adversaries we tend to prioritize.
And so why is the U.S. such a large target in U.S. enterprise?
I think the easiest answer for that is the U.S. has the largest concentration of valuable assets. Like we have the largest tech companies in the S&P 500. Like some of the biggest companies in the world tend to be American. Like think NVIDIA, think OpenAI, and each of those companies have valuable IP. I think that makes us a very, very, very valuable target, because if you are able to copy that, steal that, you can use that and get a giant leg up. A lot of what I just described was homegrown and created, and it has taken decades of research, development, and investment to get to. But if a foreign adversary can steal that, they can leapfrog. They can skip entire cycles of evolution and get to a place. So I think that the second reason why I think the US is a big target is we're heavily connected. Everything is in the cloud today. Everything is with three different companies. I think the biggest cloud providers in the US are Amazon, Microsoft, and you also have Oracle playing a big role now. I think the fact that many companies are kind of concentrated with them, our attack surface is simultaneously large and known. Everybody knows if they can bring one of these companies down, they can bring lots of our national economy down. And then the fact that I think, given that America has a very large global footprint, I think the state actors that I described in my previous answers, they see US targets as high return. If we can hold American companies hostage, right, they are willing to pay, or I don't know if they are willing to pay, I shouldn't say that, but there's a high return if they are willing to pay. So I would say those are some of the reasons why America is a very valuable target. And I think one other thing I do want to point out, this is more of my observation, the United States' infrastructure has a very old legacy system. So even today, we hear stories about how IBM mainframes are powering hospitals or potentially air traffic control. Those still exist. It's not a bad thing. A lot of money went into it, so people have incentive to maintain them. I get that. But because those exist and because those are not super secure and they're very easy to hack, I think having those soft spots in the US infrastructure also creates an opening for bad actors.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so really interesting question. So regulators have a role to play here, and that's going to affect, your role if you want to be a CISO. What are kind of the key aspects of regulation? How is that shifting around actually as we've had some changes at the top?
I think let's break that down into two things, right? Like the influence of regulations. I think one of the things at a macro level, disclosure requirements. So as a company, right, if something bad happens and you are in the business of serving customers, right, you have a responsibility to disclose what happened. You have the responsibility to disclose how it happened, how long it took you to respond to it, and what are the adequate measures you have taken to make sure something like this doesn't happen. I've also seen regulations focus heavily on third parties and vendors. In the ecosystem that we operate in as a country, we are very connected. We rely on each other. We oftentimes rely on many other companies to fulfill the simplest of tasks, right? Because of the specialization involved. So I think regulations have started to ask companies, especially the big companies, how well do you know these people that you do business with? Do you understand what they do with the data you give them? Do they understand what their responsibility to you is? And I think there's also been a proliferation of sector-specific cybersecurity regulations. So in my life, I've seen, credit card industry, PCI used to be the big thing back in the day. Then came HIPAA, right? And now we have very specific, industry-specific mandates globally as well. So if you're a multinational, you have to pay attention to those. Now, to answer the second part, like how does this change a CISO's responsibility? So for those that may not know, Chief Information Security Officer, they tend to be the top of the food chain, the executive presence for the security organization, right? So some of the basic things that I think this does for the CISO is, in general, traditional security company or traditional security functions, everybody knows that they have to maintain a register of their risks. Like, what are the top risks that I, as a company, have to deal with? I think now regulations force you to think about like risk appetite. What that means is, I think it's very obvious now that you can never prevent 100% of bad things from happening.
In other words, the environment's always on red.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think instead of doing that, I think regulations now expect you to operate with some risk, but they put the responsibility and the onus on the CISO to say, hey, what is that risk that we as a business are willing to take on? You have to be very clear about that, because anything above that, you have to address. And you have to show that you're making a good faith effort to address. So this means CISOs are now required to show that the security decisions that they're making are very much in line with the business objectives of the company. So this is why the CISO role has become an executive role now, because they are plugged into the board and they are able to get the strategic information from right at the top, and they're able to play a role in those strategic decision making. And I think from a tactical perspective, there's a lot of emphasis now on testing and maintaining and continuously improving your tactical capabilities. I think we have mentioned this a few times now, but the threat actors and the way in which they try to attack you and the way in which they try to infiltrate changes on the daily. So as a CISO, you have to make sure your capabilities are also changing daily. I know daily is an exaggeration, but on an ongoing basis would be a much better way of talking about it.
I think we're not even 19 minutes into this, and we've like clearly established the massive demand for CISOs and everybody that works in this area. So how does AI reshaping the perimeter? And maybe I could just ask you, like, what's the most outrageous AI-driven threat that you've seen in one of the enterprises you've been in?
So I'll talk about how AI is reshaping everything, because I have very strong opinions on this, and it's a one of my favorite topics. So let me give everybody on the call a visual model here, right? Let's start from the threat side. These are the bad actors, right? So AI is enabling attackers to do reconnaissance in a much larger scale. So that means even if attackers are not actively trying to get in, they're actively able to discover more information about you at a much faster rate, right? Which means that then they have the luxury, they just know more about you, so they have a luxury to take a little bit more time to to develop those exploits. And then where I think AI has become a real tool for these attackers is that AI is able to generate very personalized attack vectors. For example, what does that mean? I'm sure everybody knows what phishing and social engineering generally is. Back in the day, it used to be that you would get a robotic voice on a phone call trying to ask you for your credit card information, or some kind of a very obviously spam looking text message that is asking you to ship money or wire money. Imagine now if you get a phone call and the person on the other line is synthetic but sounds like someone you know, right? I'll give you a very personal anecdote. I have a friend who's a lawyer. This person has been on the internet because they have argued cases during the pandemic over Zoom. They've also been on the internet because they've been on TV and stuff like that. A social engineer was able to take that, put it in AI, and kind of come up with this like a fake, AI video of this person apparently in duress asking her mother for help. Say, hey, I've been kidnapped. Can you please wire money to this person because they're holding me hostage? Now, thankfully, this person's mother didn't fall for it because this person's mother thought to ask some questions and make some, phone calls to check if everything is all right. But the point being, I saw that video and it looks very, very real. For the uninitiated, they could easily fall for these deep fakes. So I would say, to answer your second question, the biggest category is the synthetic personas and
Yeah.
deep fakes, which again, they're not necessarily being used to fulfill the attack. They're just being used to kind of erode your trust and make you reveal something which can then lead to a much deeper, larger attack. So I think that's how the threat side is changing. And I want to quickly talk about the defense side. I think large organizations that with a lot of money are able to use AI for the flip side of it. How quickly can you do pattern recognition on what's bad? So anomaly detection, hunting for these threats. So I think AI is also superpowering the capabilities that traditional security organizations already had. And I think so essentially the net result of all of this is the rules of engagement are changing. Speed above all else has become a thing. So it's not just if you're doing the right things, it's how quickly you can do the right things.
Yeah, no, this makes sense. And I think, it's a great time to ask you the question, if you had sort of one piece of advice for folks in our audience, if they want to pursue a career as a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, what's that one piece of advice you think you'd like to share with the audience?
I think the biggest thing, the CISOs that I've seen that are very successful, they understand the business very well. So I think taking a little bit of time, if you're in finance, making sure you understand the nuances of the business that you're in. If you're in insurance, if you're in healthcare, I think taking the time to understand the business, I think will make you a better CISO because you can then connect the priorities, the cybersecurity priorities that you will have to execute upon. You can map them much closer to the business objectives. And I think that is the highest return on investment you can get as a CISO. Making sure that
it's a great point. It's a great point. Yeah, because there's kind of national standards around this stuff, but there's very specific domain requirements in some areas, and you point that out. That's great. So we're going to turn now to some other hot technologies as promised. And I know you have an opinion on these. So let's talk a little bit about crypto, which has also gotten a boost from the changing regulatory backdrop.
Yep.
So are you an evangelist or a skeptic or somewhere in between? And what do you think it means for cybersecurity?
So I would say I'm a realist. And I think having been an outsider who was looking in and then having been an insider, I think realist, I think sums me up perfectly. I also think that crypto or DeFi, decentralized finance, and traditional finance have found peace. And I think there is a convergence happening. There are major caveats. Regulatory clarity is still up in question. The business models are still very different. I think crypto companies are tech first, but traditional financial companies are finance first. So the volume and amount of risk they're willing to take on are very different. So it hasn't gotten mainstream yet, but I do think there's a convergence happening because the biggest indicator is the increased institutional interest. So a lot of banks, like big names that everybody in this room will recognize, they all have a play in the crypto space now. So I think when the big whales make those plays, the market will respond accordingly. So I do think that convergence is actively happening right now.
Yeah, it's a really key point. And just a reminder to our audience, we will be taking questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So you can start popping those in there. We'll pick them up in a second. So Aditya, with the introduction and more mainstreaming of crypto, does this like solve security issues, or does it create or introduce new ones, in your opinion?
So yes and yes. So jokes aside, I think it depends. I do think crypto has introduced some novel security frontiers simultaneously as it tries to solve old ones. So the traditional security problems that we have, they persist, but now we have smart contract vulnerabilities. So all these blockchains, right? Blockchains have smart contracts. Those are essentially the rules of engaging with the blockchain, right? Now, these smart contracts back in the day when they started used to be a simple contract document up to built in accordance to some standard out there. But now they're layered, they have a lot of intelligence built in, and the code is constantly updated. And anytime you have to do anytime there's a moving part, there's a possibility that some kind of flaw will be introduced. So those flaws can lead to bugs, which can lead to losses, right? Um, Crypto has also made custody, meaning think of it as an infrastructure where you have money, where you have cryptographic keys, where you have people's information in wallets, all in one big box. Just visualize that. What that means is now you have one place where you have a ton of information that, if it gets into the wrong hands, can result in massive losses. People getting social engineered because a crypto company was poor with their data security practices. We hear that all the time. So I do think they have introduced some these new frontiers, which has required people to go out and get new skills to either solve. And then traditionally, cryptography, just generally, it's a very math heavy field, and mathematicians are constantly coming up with new ways to make their cryptographic algorithms stronger, because as compute power keeps increasing, now with the advent of quantum computing, I don't know how it impacts crypto, but a lot of algorithms are susceptible to getting cracked. So there's always that give and take, that tension, that song and dance, whatever expression you want to use. That has not changed. But in addition to that, some of the new security frontiers that I just described have popped up. So there's a ton of work to do.
Yeah, no, it's huge. I'm wondering if you want to just comment maybe on a couple of the verticals, like stablecoins growing super rapidly, mainstreaming, creeping into many different areas of finance, like cross-border payments and potentially treasury functions and stuff like that. Is there anything specific to some of these use cases that you'd like to point out for our audience?
So stablecoins, obviously, I do think there's a future there, and I do think in the near term, the market cap for stablecoins is obviously going up, especially the ones that are pegged to the fiat currency, US dollar, to be very specific. I think it is just waiting for someone, meaning some company, to solve the payment issue. If you sitting in the US can pay someone sitting in Japan using an app, a simple send to their wallet from yours, once that user experience improves, I do think stablecoins will take off. So I believe in this. I think both Visa and MasterCard are kind of coming to the recognition that the company that owns stablecoin rails will have a lot that they can benefit from through the transaction volume. So there's that. I do think tokenization will make a comeback. So I know NFTs were a big thing during the pandemic, then it died down. I think the core function behind it, like tokenization, like making sure that a physical asset has a digital signature with some built-in intelligence, so you can transact in an entirely digital ecosystem without moving the physical asset around. I do think that'll make a comeback. I'm thinking more in the context of bonds, equities, real estate. I don't think selling pictures of apes and monkeys are going to make a comeback. I don't know. That's always the case, but I do think there's some very real use cases that are being solved by some brilliant people out there. So I think those are two areas that I keep an eye out. Again, this is from my perspective, my opinion, but I do feel strongly that as the regulatory clarity sets in, as people try to figure out how can settlements happen at a tokenized layer, settlement of physical assets is easy. Now there's a ton of paperwork involved. Imagine if all that friction goes away. Whichever company solves that is in for a good time.
Yeah, no, I love the way you're kind of weaving in some tech growth opportunities into the conversation. So a bit of a leading indicator of what might be future interesting, career paths for folks in our audience. Maybe
Mhm.
one question for you, since there's been just a huge shift in the regulatory backdrop. When you think about your career, how do you think about that regulatory uncertainty? Is this like an opportunity? Is it a chance to think about things that you just wouldn't do? So how did you think about that in your career, and where do you kind of draw the line in the sand where you say the uncertainty is
Mhm.
too much? I think it's an important career point.
So interestingly enough, doing an MBA actually helped. And I want to emphasize that that doesn't mean I'm encouraging everybody to just go out and do an MBA. But as I got into crypto, I recognized that there was a need to build regulatory literacy, right? And a lot of the conversation around how digital assets are treated, is it a security, is it a commodity? A lot of that literature already exists in business. I think the fundamental principles have not changed. SEC has existed long before crypto companies, CFTC, Treasury. I think kind of doing an MBA, the reason I bring that up is it kind of opened my knowledge base and understanding in those spaces, which genuinely helped me kind of become regulatorily literate. Like when regulations are published now, I actually understand the implications at a company level and implications to my job. The other thing I would like to emphasize is security is more than just tools, hacking, incidents. I think there's a lot more softer uh, realms in it that I think people often overlook. So, for example, anti money laundering. I know it's an operational topic and it's not something that security folks tend to talk about, but knowing what it means, knowing how it can impact operations is especially useful in a crypto company because we want to bring that kind of rigorousness and hygiene to blockchain. So a lot of the transactions that we have are published onto the blockchain. The general rule there is it's for everybody to see, so it's very hard for someone to get away with it. But if we can bring that added layer of rigorousness, like know your customer, anti-money laundering, all of that stuff, you make it adoptable, right? Businesses will start to trust you. I think it makes it much more adoptable, and then it opens up the ecosystem to bigger players. And then that being said, the third thing, and this is again my take, I think people have to start becoming comfortable with slightly hybrid slash generalist roles. It's good to be an expert in your domain, right? But it's also a good time to pick up something else because if you are deployable in multiple parts of the company, again, I'm not promising that it'll make you immune to AI, but I do think that it'll make you a very valuable part of any of these companies that are moving forward at like light speed today.
No, I think it's a great point because you've had a career in tech, and we were going to turn next to the impact of AI on all of this
Mhm.
and on organizations and stuff. And it's something we're all thinking hard about, and I'm sure our audience is interested in, which is in this incredibly fast changing pace, how to keep relevant, and how is AI going to change the workplace, especially in tech. So based on your experience, what's your advice to this group for how to navigate this? And you mentioned a few things already, but I think we should really get into this a little bit because I think it would be really, really helpful to folks listening.
So, again, from my perspective, I think one of the things that'll start happening going forward, I think the way a traditional organization was structured, the very pyramid type of structure where you have a small group of leadership and then each layer of management gets bigger and bigger. I think that changes. I don't know what that shape will look like. We will go from a pyramid to, I've heard, the diamond shape where you have, lots of layers. The decision making is still, the traditional model is lots of layers, decision making is slow. But I think the diamond layer is there's going to be a broad middle layer of specialists. So to my point just before, this is going to be people who are good at more than one thing, right? Um, what that means is get comfortable. If you're a people manager, I've seen this trend. This is actually playing out in a lot of big companies. If you are a people manager, be very prepared to become a IC, like an individual contributor. Not that doesn't mean you're going to have to abandon your management skills. I mean, in addition to, I think middle management is going to shrink going forward. There's going to be a lot of emphasis. People who can think strategically but act tactically, like be that translation engine, those people are going to become very valuable. I think this is where, understanding your business in addition to understanding cybersecurity is useful. So I think my advice is position yourself with a broad, for a broad use case. And as someone who can connect the strategic and the tactical, I know that has been said in the past as well, like people who can think strategic. It's a very consultant speak, but I genuinely mean that if you can be a domain expert and something else, that'll give you that mobility so you can kind of stay adaptable.
Yeah, I think this is an absolutely great point. As you navigate this new organizational structure and the changing world and how fast everything's moving, it's kind of ironic in a way, because we went so specialized in the workplace, and now the nature of work's really changing. And like you just said, that curiosity, ability to pivot, think big, think small, get stuff done, also manage people, is a pretty interesting insight that you just shared. So that's great. How about just the tech landscape itself? I mean, when you start getting into AI, you're talking about, as a cybersecurity leader, or even as a tech leader or as a business leader, that whole tech stack is changing, right? Like, you've got to have a semantic layer. Maybe you're working with more partners. Is there stuff there that we should know about, and this audience should care about, when we think about careers, that relates to just the nature of the landscape that we're talking about?
For sure. I think with the advent of AI and frontier technology, and I use frontier with a grain of salt. AI has existed, for a very, very long time. I think it's just now become usable for the masses. But that being said, I do think that no matter where you are in the world, educating yourself and just knowing, and if you have the ability to go deep, for folks that are willing to go deep in any scenario, that's great. But I think knowing what you can use it for, and then using it for more than just one or two atomic use cases. Like, if you can use it at scale, congratulations, you're farther ahead the curve than most people. But you have to make the effort to get there. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a teacher, if you're in insurance, if you're in medical sales, it doesn't matter. Because every job has, if you think of it as a stack, every job has a layer where there's just some manual, mundane work, mechanical work that needs to be done. And AI is going to make that very, very easy to do at scale. So you're going to have to start paying real good attention to the stuff above that and become really good at it. So, I don't want to say to become irreplaceable, but at least it gives you the ability to operate for a long period of time. With that being said, I do think the skills landscape is also evolving. Um, from a technical perspective, a lot of there's an emphasis on orchestration. So because AI is able to do things at scale, now it's our responsibility to make sure that we can orchestrate, like, be that traffic cop. When I say that's still going to be a human job. So I think learning how the various components moving at light speed work well together, and how to kind of like make sure they're pointing in the right direction, that strategic muscle, if you can do that, that is great. I am personally very interested in knowing and learning about quantum computing, just because, with my background in security, one of the biggest barriers to security, is compute power. So in security, we have a saying: it's not impossible, it's infeasible. Meaning, it is just going to take a bad actor with limited resources a very, very long time to break in. So there's no incentive for them to even try. But quantum computing is going to test that thesis. So I personally am taking the time to kind of like learn more about that, like understand how it can impact my line of work. So I do think that, and I don't know a combination of AI and quantum computing, what that's going to look like. I have no idea. I think there are people way smarter than me who probably have an idea. So, I try my best to consume that. And then the last thing I would say is, this is a little bit tongue in cheek, but get very good at math. What I mean by that is, even in cybersecurity, I think there's a lot of emphasis on quantifying problems. Like, how much will this cost me? How much will this cost me if I have to fix it, or if something bad happens? Cost, cost, cost. It's a great thing because everybody understands money. It's a funny way of saying things, but everybody speaks money. If you explain any problem to a person as a cost benefit analysis, they will understand it. It doesn't matter what the problem is. Most of the product leaders that I work with are not cybersecurity experts. They don't understand attacks, threats. They don't care vectors. They don't care about those terminology, because I'm able to articulate the problem they're about to face in an economic context. So for me, being comfortable with numbers, knowing how to connect the dots from very technical concepts to dollar values has been a great force multiplier. I would encourage people to think about that in their careers and see if there's a connection like that that they can potentially work on.
I think that's a great point, because you're talking again about that border between business and technology that's really closing, and you're able to articulate the business case for some of the things you're doing. So
Yeah.
you've spoken really eloquently about, cyber and compliance and all the topics we've discussed. How do you decide what you won't do? So are there things that are just outside your playbook where you've had to say no, and how did you navigate that?
So the easy one there is, if there's something that I don't know or if I'm not comfortable about, I obviously either defer or try to work with others who may know, or simply just say no. But that being said, I think one of the luxuries of being in tech is it is such the entire industry is, think of it as a massive river that's constantly just moving in one direction. I think allowing yourself to be open to just like the signals that are out there, I think kind of looking at it and working with people who you trust to understand what that means, I think has been a great mechanism by which I have able to preempt potential roadblocks or potentially painting myself into a corner career wise. Um, I think this is where the general things that we learn in business school, like always be connecting the dots, like A, B, C, D. I think some professor of mine used that in a class. I think that sounds funny, but it makes a ton of sense. Like always be looking for signals, talking to people to understand. So I think I would say I've been very fortunate in that regard. But that being said, there are things that I wouldn't do. There's a lot of topics that as a security professional, the very hardcore technical stuff, building application security is an area that I try to steer away from, because even though I was educated to be an engineer, I never actually have coded a single day in my life. So when people present those problems to me, I'm just like, hey, there's people who are much more skilled to tackle this than I am. But my skill sets are to be that hybrid business tech guy, so I kind of stay within my lane.
Yeah, no, this is also, I think, really good advice. A couple more future-looking questions. So two of them. If this was 5 years from now, what would be keeping you up at night? And then secondly, if you were in that 5-year future and you looked back, what would be the big assumption that everybody's making today that will look totally naive? So what are you going to worry about 5 years from now? And what as we look back is going to look like, nah, we didn't get it?
So the second question I'm going to answer off the top, because this is something I have strong opinions on. So one of the things, I'll speak from a crypto, DeFi, stablecoin, that perspective. One of the things that we have not emphasized is user experience. The company or the app that simplifies a user's experience, when people say on-chain wallets, the company that abstracts all of that away and uses simple terminology and makes it very easy for you to send money or transact is going to be the winner. I think what people are taking this for granted is user experience. It doesn't have to be, it can be an afterthought today. I think that's a bad strategy. I think the company that solves that problem and makes that simpler is going to be the winner. It's quite literally going to be winner takes all. Because I do think, even though regulation is maturing, it is slow. But what will keep me up at night is I wonder if it is truly going to be even. While I do think on one hand there are clearer rules for stablecoin issuance, I also am starting to see there's a lot of market manipulation. Disclosures are being kind of like worked around. There are restrictions in some areas. There are not restrictions in some areas. There's a lot of vagaries. It's uneven. So I feel like that is making it very hard for companies today to plan 4 or 5 years from now. And also, regulations are very policy driven. Like policies, the winds of change they change every few years in the United States. So it has become very hard for companies to invest time, energy, and effort to think longer term. So everything is happening in short bursts. So I think that means there'll be a lot of fragmentation. Some companies will get it right, some won't. So those that don't will suffer a little bit. So I think, depending on what side you find yourself on, it might keep you up at night. So I think that's how I would answer that question.
No, I think that's very thoughtful. So we're going to open it up to our audience now. We've got a few questions in the Q&A section. So I want to just go through those. And I think a really interesting one is, what advice might you have for a tech company that's wanting to, say, launch a native cryptocurrency for their community of creators, after introducing functional tokens or utility tokens, and how could that company best position themselves to ensure that there's real value backing a digital coin? We all know there's a lot of meme coins out there, I guess, is part of the question. How do we get around that? What should we do?
So this is not going to be a super magical or complicated answer. The fundamental fact is, as long as the token in the hands of a person adds value to them, it solves a problem for them, it adds a service to them, it gets them access to something they didn't have without the token, whatever that may be, right? If the token is able to add value to that person, then there's going to be adoption, and then there's going to be other people who interact, and then there's going to be an ecosystem, then there's going to be a transference of ideas. So I think you mentioned creator economy. I think that only happens if you have enough people, so you have mass, a critical mass. So I think if you are in that business where you're tokenizing something or you are issuing a token, like make sure whatever it's backing or whatever it's backed up to adds some real life value. So I would say that's the simplest answer. There's no need to over engineer this. It's just if it can add value, you are good to go.
No, I think that it's a good question, and these questions are kind of skipping around a little bit on some of the topics we've covered, but I think that's okay since we were talking about careers at the forefront and we're incorporating AI, cyber, or crypto and stuff. So one question has to do with applications of AI and relying on historical data, and so that's a question about the sort of the pitfalls of that in an environment that's really fast changing. So the question is, does this make sense? And what's the workaround if you're relying on historical data to predict a future that might look really different?
I think that's the tension here. So not to add to that question, but I think what we are also noticing is AI currently doesn't have guardrails. I'm sure that'll happen at some point, but it does not. The way AI companies operate, the way LLMs operate, there's no guardrails right now. So what is happening is AI is training itself on the data that it has created itself. And, AI being AI, or at least LLM being a version of AI, has the tendency to fill in the blanks with stuff. You call it hallucination, whatever you want to call it, there's layers to it, but it tends to do that. So imagine an LLM that's training itself on data that it has created, which is completely sloppy. I think it's called AI slop. So back to the question. In general, when it comes to cybersecurity and risk management that I do, predictive risk management is exactly looking at historic data, understanding patterns, understanding the signals, removing the noise, and trying to forecast what's going to happen in the future given the context. So I think what will change with AI and what AI is doing to the world is those contexts will change a lot. So back in the day, I think a lot of people who are financially minded probably already know this. You do in insurance, they do a lot of modeling. So back in the day, you could have 2 or 3 scenarios, but now what we have to do is we have to model multiple scenarios, and we try our best to assign confidence. This is a very probability and statistics way of doing things, but you try to identify where you are most confident, which scenario you're most confident will play out given the assumptions. I don't think one way to kind of prevent the speed at which everything is changing is now I think companies, instead of planning months and years ahead, I think they are starting to plan just quarters ahead, so 2-3 months at a time, which it adds a lot of management overhead and a lot of just cost and expense to do that. But that is a great way to make sure you're putting yourself in a place where you can react a little bit faster versus waiting multiple years at a time. So I think that's one way to kind of overcome that. But beyond that, I think the problem is being faced by everybody. AI is changing the rules of engagement so fast. I think you're always going to be one step behind. So the best you can do is manage that kind of delay.
Yeah, no, this is a great response because you kind of got into the difference between probabilistic futures and scenarios and things and how to handle all this uncertainty. So it's really interesting. We're getting really great questions from this audience. So thank you guys for all the smart ones. And here's another one. So this is really about the point behind blockchain being, the whole point of it being distributed to, control risk that way. And how does this evolve into a winner-take-all scenario that you described? So this is the tension that we have between permission blockchains and centralization and permissionless blockchains, which was the original nirvana that were supposed to be distributed and therefore more safe. So how do we reconcile these two stances? You predicted more of a winner-take-all future. What are you thinking about that?
So I think the winner-take-all example that I gave was with the UX, the user experience. I think this question is particularly around the
more of a general question. It's more fair. It's more of a general question than just on the UX where you commented on winner take all. So please feel free to answer it any way you prefer.
Sure. This is again my opinion. The thing with blockchain, to me, fundamentally, blockchain is just a way to organize data with some implied trust. By putting something in the public sphere where everybody can see and every transaction, once committed, cannot be undone, it's just a democratic process to recognize the truth. If enough people agree that X is X, then X is X in that context. Can enough people be fooled into believing X is X? That's quite possible. I'm not a blockchain expert, by the way. I do cybersecurity in a crypto company, so you don't need to be a blockchain expert to have that career. But again, the emphasis on blockchain and how it can be shaped is not something that I'm seeing particularly from our perspective. I think the user's experience interacting with the blockchain, there's a lot of emphasis, in fact, in completely abstracting away blockchain. I think our product leaders are thinking about it more in terms of how can a user just be assured that their data is committed instead of using terms like blockchain and block. So I think there's a bit of a trend away from terminology and just experience, emphasis on experience.
Yeah, so you're talking about financial services needing definitive settlement rather than like probabilistic settlement,
Correct.
things like that. Yeah.
Correct. This is where tokenization, if done correctly, can help. If you have an asset that is tokenized and you can take it from one ecosystem to the other without having to constantly prove who you are or constantly prove the value of that asset, I think that's the experience that folks are focused on today, at least from my perspective, at least from the perspective of the company that I work for. Versus that, hey, this is a blockchain, like this is what's happening behind the scenes and all that stuff.
So I think one really good question from our audience is about where we are in technological development in terms of opportunity to get a role where literally nobody's an expert yet in some areas, but it's also changing fast. So the question is like, can you get hired by a crypto-oriented company without crypto background?
100%. So I think if you think of it first principle terms, crypto, the term comes from cryptography, and cryptography is math. It has nothing to do with how crypto is, shown on social media. So, for example, a part of crypto that I find fascinating, but I don't have any skills in myself, is on-chain forensics. So, when fraud happens, right, on a blockchain, we have people who can actually go back to the very beginning of the blockchain and trace every single transaction, corroborate that to make sure that it was authentic, and they have the skill set, they have tools to build out heuristics so they can monitor. So there's a lot of fascinating stuff there. But in order to become a on-chain forensic expert, you don't have to know how to program and you don't have to even understand blockchain. You're essentially looking at signals, and you need to have that mindset where you can do great pattern recognition, understand when things are deviating. So again, I'm not saying don't learn anything about blockchain at all, but I think fundamentally what I'm trying to get at is there are some core capabilities that just look different and sound different, but the capabilities remain the same. Can you quantify risks in a mathematical context? Do you have the good detective skills to recognize what to look for next? Do you have the ability to discern, noise from signals, stuff like that? I think that is evergreen. That is applicable to multiple industries, in fact. So the easy answer is no. You don't have to be a crypto expert. You can be a crypto enthusiast, which I think is the entry level. You're crypto aware. I think that's good enough. But as long as you have the intellectual horsepower to think through things, that's totally fine.
That's great too. I think everything you described tonight, there's, we've talked about 3 or 4 fields already that you've encapsulated in your career. And another really good question from our audience is, what do you think the biggest misperception is by regulators about the various industries we talked about? Like, where are the biggest gaps in understanding between business, enterprise, and regulation?
I think between business and regulation, if we had to break that down, I think it's gotten, I would say it's gotten a little too close for comfort. It's almost like businesses have, at least in crypto, I'll speak purely for crypto, businesses have gone in and dictated the regulations themselves. So I think in fact, worry about the flip case where I don't think regulators are distant enough to have that independence. They're not arbiters. They're no longer protecting the consumer. I think it's become more of a, how can we make it easier for the business? Again, it's not a bad thing. That's where it is. That's a feature of the system. In terms of, sorry, what was the question was broadly around what's the next big thing?
I mean, I think you actually answered it, which is sort of what was the biggest misperception, and you actually flipped it around in a really interesting way, which is it's gone a little too far the other direction. So that's a great one. There's a wonderful kind of last question here for us tonight. And you touched on it already, but what kind of classes do you think are most relevant if you're here in the NYU Stern ecosystem? Are there things that you would recommend that folks pursue if they want to follow in your amazing path?
Yeah. Oh, gosh. I cannot emphasize this enough. Be very comfortable with numbers. I'm not asking anybody to get a PhD in math, but I'm simply saying, I think any class, like economics classes, like if you understand how finance works in any context, I think is going to be a very useful tool in your arsenal. So, that's what I mean by, do you understand how numbers work? Like the basics of finance, any kind of a basic finance class will be very useful. Same for economics. The macro forces that shape the world, I know that sounds cool when I say it, has not changed. And I don't think that'll change, because fundamentally, it's always going to be a push-pull between value created, value consumed. That is just going to be a fact of human nature. That doesn't change. So I think a basic economics class, when I took it, was very eye-opening for me. So I went down the path and I took even more. So I highly encourage everybody to have the same experience, because I do think it gives you a great way to kind of visualize any industry, any company, any country. It doesn't matter. I think every company, country, they all have the same institutions. They're all made of the same parts. So that's two. The third, I would say, and this is, again, I feel strongly about this. I think we're getting to the point where ethics has become a very mainstream topic, because there's a lot of tools that can very easily make push us in the direction of unethical stuff. So with advent of AI, at least, and with the lack of guardrails around it, there's going to be a lot of questions on should we, shouldn't we, where is this okay, when is this okay, at what age is this okay? There's a lot of questions, and I think I highly encourage folks to like anticipate those. And if people can throw themselves at it today and try to find answers, it'll only help people and consumers tomorrow. So I think those are some of the areas where I would suggest, and if I could go back in time, I would happily do that all over again.
No, thank you, because I think you've touched on many things in the NYU catalog, so I appreciate that. And we want to thank you just incredibly for being here with us tonight. It was just an absolutely amazing session. And I hope, as you see, and as our audience sees, that fintech is really still very much at the forefront of technology innovation and development, and your career is a shining example of that. So for everybody in our audience, thank you for being here. I think today's chat was great. We had a great mix of critical insights, pragmatic advice, inspiring wisdom. And so to close the session, I just want to thank our guest. That was amazing. Our audience, the Fubon Center and the Career Center, and a special shout out to Ruby and our tech team at NYU, without whom events like this would not be possible. So with all of that, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Aditya. It was amazing. And good luck to everybody in their fintech future.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for coming.